At the outset, these readings seem somewhat mysterious and also totally unrelated, and I just want to slowly step through them because there's actually a profound claim being made here, and they are intimately intertwined. So let's just start with Paul. Paul is writing to the community at Rome, and he's saying that he's been set apart for the gospel of God. So he's on his mission. And this mission is to proclaim the person of Christ that he describes in this way. This man was previously promised through his prophets in the Holy Scriptures, so he's anticipated. The gospel about his son descended from David according to the flesh, but established as Son of God in power. Now, why might this part matter? Because he's not anchoring Jesus into Moses. Remember, for the Jews, Moses was the greatest prophet of the Old Testament. But the issue with the Mosaic covenant, and by that I don't mean the problem, I just mean the circumstance, was that in the Mosaic covenant that was forged on Mount Sinai, and all the people in the desert were gathered there at the base of the mountain, it was at that moment that they became a nation. So the scope of the covenant was only to them in all of its promises, in all of the gifts that it bestows, its blessings, its curses, expectations, and obligations. There was no real vision in the Mosaic covenant towards the redemption of the world. It was God calling a people to himself, making them his people, and them understanding their identity as his people set apart through this covenant. 500 years later, David comes, and God makes a covenant with David through his son, and that's really important. It's through David's son that this covenant is going to be realized, and things shift. The people of God go from just being a nation into a kingdom, and God says that in this covenant that now makes them a kingdom, through David's son, God is going to bring all the nations to himself. So it takes on now this international, universal scope. And that begins to happen in the person of Solomon. So Solomon is taken down by a Levite priest, and he's anointed with oil. He's chrismed, and he becomes the first Mashiach, Messiah, and is referred to in the Davidic covenant, and he's the first person as an individual to be called the Son of God. So Solomon is this fulfillment of the promise, this Son of God, anointed Messiah character, who is then the one through whom God begins bringing all the nations into himself. And the way that he does this is to build a temple, and so that the nations can stream towards the temple. Now, it's riddled with insufficiencies. First of all, Solomon's like a big sinner, has some personal issues. Second of all, they're still living the law of Moses, which how can you be an Ethiopian in a different country living the law of Moses when you're required to go to the temple, which is a whole country away? So there's just impracticalities to it. It's looking for a future fulfillment. And ultimately, the whole thing kind of breaks down in the 500s. And so it's when the kingdoms are wiped out and all these problems arise. And so it's waiting for its fulfillment. Now here walks in Jesus. And he's using language like, this generation is an evil generation, meaning you're suffering from the same problems of your own ancestors. And the problem is what Paul is going to be trying to work out in the Romans. So I'll get back to that in a second. And so he says to them, at the judgment, the queen of the south, now that's an image of the queen who rose from her own throne and traveled long distance to go see Solomon in his time. So he's referring to Solomon's time here. The queen of the south will rise with this men of this generation, and she will condemn them because she came from the ends of the earth as a Gentile to hear the wisdom of Solomon. So something about her heart was better conditioned than you, the people of God, he's referring to as the evil generation. But there is something greater than Solomon here. Why? Because he is the actual Son of God. He is the actual Messiah, the one whom a Levite priest, and this is John the Baptist, who's the son of a Levite, took down to the river Jordan and was anointed not just with oil, but with the Holy Spirit. He is the one that all of the prophets, as Paul says, were promising and seeing only in shadowy form was to come. And he can't get a response out of the people in front of him. That's a problem. So what's the response that he's looking for? And this is what Paul says. Through him, meaning Jesus, we've received the grace of apostleship to bring about the obedience of faith for the sake of his name. In other words, when Solomon was building a family for God, the Son of God, greater than Solomon, appeared and is doing that very thing. He is trying to make us sons in his own sonship. And that requires an obedience of faith, an interior disposition that accepts sonship in all that it means, in all that the covenant is putting upon us, because we accept God as our Father. It's not obedience to rules. It's not a system of control. It's a father-sonship relationship that requires I accept God in his authority to be my dad and to dictate what that looks like. And in order for me to accept that, I have to have a docility about me. And Jesus is saying, you are not being docile. And because of that, just like the time of Solomon, you're going to lose everything. And shortly after his death, they do. The Romans come in and they wipe out the temple. It becomes totally flattened. They wipe out the city. People are running for the hills, and they totally lose their covenant life. Mary is fighting for that same obedience of faith. You think of Our Lady of Guadalupe. You think of Our Lady of Fatima 400 years later. And what's happening is she's bringing people to her son, and it is the Gentiles, such that now the Catholic Church is strongest not in Israel, but instead in Brazil, instead in the United States, instead in Mexico, reaching unto the ends of the earth as the people of God, the family of God, includes the entire planet. And it's mind-blowing. So here's the invitation. You are invited to be a part of something that is bigger than Solomon could have ever imagined. You are invited into a privileged relationship with God as your Father, with all the blessings and the promises that that comes with. But to accept that invitation, you have to kneel. You have to kneel to God as Father. Are you ready for that? Is that what you want?